All right, if everyone's ready to start, we'll call this meeting to order of the Joint Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. The clerk's taken a silent roll, and we do have a quorum present. I'll recognize the co-chair for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move approval of the January 10th, 2022 minutes be approved as written.
Motion, all in favor? All opposed? Minutes are adopted. Before we start, just a note that all the mics in the room are hot, so if anyone has any commentary, it's going to be out there. First, we have a presentation from Dr. Matt Wilson, Associate Dean for Research, Associate Director of Agriculture and Forestry Experiment Station with WVU on biosecurity. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us here in Morgantown. It was a nicer day earlier, but I'm sure it'll be nice later again. I was asked to talk to you a little bit about biosecurity. The understanding was that was in part because of the issue we've got with high pathogenicity avian influenza in the country. And so I'm going to give a few introductory remarks. Then we have an alumnus of the college that is with USDA APHIS that's going to talk about HPAI specifically. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing both at the Davis College and in partnership with some of our other colleagues in the state about preparedness that would relate to issues surrounding biosecurity. So the big picture, agricultural biosecurity is really about hygiene. Whether it's hygiene of animals, hygiene of plants, it's about doing things and having plans in place to minimize disease spread and risk, pest infestation, things like that impact agriculture, but really impact food. And so when we talk about agricultural biosecurity, at the end of the day, we're talking about part of the hygiene path that leads to a safe food supply. And so it's important when we think about a particular animal disease, but it relates to a lot of aspects of the food production chain. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think we're in a better place today. So I remember when I was an undergraduate student at Purdue University, at that time, the swine industry was just starting to move to a more secure environment. They were moving their production to all in and all out, where they'd move a group of animals into a house together, and they would leave the house together, and then they would disinfect that. From there, they went to showering into and showering out of facilities with the laundry that they would wear being on site. All that just to try and minimize the chance for disease transmission. As an undergraduate student, I took a class where a professor showed a picture of a snowball with a syringe and needle in it, with the idea that you can't vaccinate everything. So times of the year we drag in mud, we drag in snow and ice, other things. So it's important that all aspects of that hygiene plan be in place, including animal movement. So there's a lot to biosecurity. So when I was asked to talk about this, I thought, well, that's half of a semester, and we talk in 50-minute increments at the university. And so there's a lot we could cover. But at the end of the day, it's about the hygiene we need to have in place and the hygiene plan we need to have in place to ensure a safe and clean food supply. And so what I'll do is then turn it over to Dr. Noggle, let her talk a little bit about HPAI in particular. But I can tell you we are in one of the silver linings of COVID-19 is that most people now have a different understanding of hygiene, disease transmission, what it means to be careful about where you are and what you might be carrying with you. And so hopefully, as one of the things that we come out of the pandemic with is that agricultural biosecurity and biosecurity generally is less of a foreign subject for people because people have a better understanding of what it means to be careful about who you're around, when you're, what you might be carrying with you, even if you don't know it. Okay? So I'll turn over to Dr. Noggle from USDA.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just on my mic. I'm going to work on sharing my presentation with you now. Let's see. Can you all see my presentation? Or?
No.
No.
Not yet.
Okay, see what we got here. How about now?
No, not yet. Okay, there we go. We're getting there now.
Great, and I'll put it into a slide view. All right, can you see my main slide, my title slide there?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks for having me. I'd like to introduce myself first because you're probably wondering, why do we have this person on the line? My name's Alicia LaRue-Noggle, and I'm a proud Preston County native. I grew up on a small beef farm there and had the pleasure of graduating from the Davis College. Went on to Ohio State for both veterinary school and my PhD. And I've been proud to work for the United States Department of Agriculture for the past about 20 years. My current role, I'm an Associate Deputy Administrator for Veterinary Services. So that means I'm essentially the number 2 veterinarian in the country, and I am the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer. So with that, the Dean asked me to share a little bit with you about the current status of the 2022 highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak. The slides that I have for y'all today are about a week old, but they still present like the right picture. And as we get to a certain slide, I'll give you the update as of today. So as many of you are aware, in the middle of February, we detected our first case of highly pathogenic avian influenza in a wild bird. Subsequently, we've had quite an outbreak going. You can see that here. This is called a histogram, and it identifies the number of new cases we identified each day. And you can see at the high point, we've identified more than 18 in a single day, more than 18 affected premises. I think this next slide does a better job of showing you the time lapse of what that looks like. So you'll see the commercial poultry premises come on as red dots, backyard premises as blue dots. Right now we're in March. Now we've moved to April. Now we're in May. And that's as of last Friday. A couple important points to note here. When we look at the commercial premises, even though we've detected the virus, I think it's 35 states as of today. It is 30 as of today. The greatest concentration of those spots are in the West, predominantly Iowa, Dakota. The majority of those are spots. We've also had another cluster over in the Pennsylvania area. Those are primarily as well as commercial broiler chickens. So you may recall that several years ago in 2014 and 2015, we had the most outbreak of a foot and animal disease in history in the United States, so HPAI outbreak. This slide demonstrates differences in the epidemiology of the outbreaks then and now with regard to the cases. And you'll see here that what we have for current outbreaks in this nice orange color, and the previous outbreak is in the gray. One line shows infected premises, and the other shows the infected, right? And I think the most important thing to note here is that it appears that for an outbreak a little earlier in the year than the one that we had in 2014, 2015. That's important, right? We're hopeful that, fingers crossed, that our outbreak gets to an end, but of course, time remains to tell the story there. Why is it important? Not only does this disease impact the livelihood of individuals across the country, it has significant economic impacts for the United States as a whole. As of the 12th of May, we had depopulated approximately 30 million head of labels, including 150 million dozen eggs. And as you can imagine, that resulted in a decrease in the supply of both that product, as well as an increase in the price on average. Broilers, similarly, 4 million head chickens have been depopulated, a reduction in that supply, and again, seeing a slight increase over the average in that product. And then finally, we've depopulated 5.5 million chickens, and a significant increase in supply there, again, resulting in an increase to consume. In addition to these domestic impacts, the most other significant thing is the international trade. We've been really fortunate that we've been able to limit most of the trade impacts through the affected state or county, and those are all negotiated through bilateral agreements. So we've been really, really fortunate. Trading partners have trusted our response.
Excuse me, Dr. Noggle, if I can interrupt for a moment.
Yeah.
If we can make sure everyone on the line's muted, we're getting a lot of audio interference here. If everyone else can make sure their phone's muted, maybe that'll help. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sorry. I'm getting an echo, but that's it. You want me to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. And so when we have these outbreaks, and this is where it's going to kind of relate into Dr. Wilson's presentation, we really want to understand the source of the outbreak, because if you understand the source and how the birds are getting infected, then you can mitigate those potential routes of exposure. So when we do that, we look at both genetic information about the virus as well as epidemiology. So we send our veterinarians out to those premises, and they really do some gumshoe epidemiology to figure out how that particular premise may have become infected. And we also look at things across time and the pattern of mutations that you see in the virus. And so, oops, I'm going to go back. Sorry about that. So we've got two kind of main routes of transmission that we all look at. One is called a common source, and this is where you have an individual point of entry into that premises, and it's just in that premises alone. So in many cases, in this outbreak, it's been a wild bird, a population of wild birds that have infected the premises, or even you could have like a mechanical vector. A great example of a common source outbreak is like a foodborne illness, where you go to the picnic, you eat something with mayonnaise in it, and everybody gets sick. That's a common source. What we really don't want is lateral transmission. And lateral transmission is when the virus is transmitting from one premise to the next, because you have gaps in your biosecurity, and you're passing it from one farm to the next, and that's what we really don't want, and that's where biosecurity comes in. So in this particular outbreak, this is a lot of words, right? This is the specific type of virus that we have. It's called the H5 2.3.4.4b avian influenza virus. And we know that it came into the U.S. through wild birds. It started in the Atlantic flyway, and then it's rapidly expanded out to wild birds. We also know that there was a second, smaller introduction of the same general virus in the northeast U.S. Up really far north, kind of associated with the Canadian outbreak that was reported. And you've probably heard about influenza virus, meaning urea sort, and we're certainly seeing that. We know that that virus is combining with North American viruses, and the majority that we've seen in our cases are urea assortments. Okay, this next slide is so cool. I'm not smart enough to fully understand it, but here's the gist. This shows all the viruses that have been genotyped. So we know what their entire genotype. And then we start comparing. And we say, how similar is it to the last one we saw? So at this point, we've analyzed over 1,500 full genome sequences. And we're able to point two things that are really important when it comes to epidemiology and biosecurity. At least 82%, the current numbers as of this week, we're closer to 85% of the detections that we're seeing in domestic poultry are consistent with that common source independent wild bird introduction. And then the remaining, or that smaller number, either 8 or 15%, depending on which figure you're looking at, we flag those for further investigation because we think there may be lateral spread. So with regard to biosecurity, I just have a couple more slides of things we've seen on this outbreak. And then I'll turn it back. So when we've gone in and looked at the facility, we've seen significant improvement since the 2015 outbreak. Premises are frequently seen a Danish entry. This is an example here. They're coming in, there's a clean line, there's a line of separation, a dirty, clean. They'll come in, the person will come in, put their barn boots here in this bucket, and they'll put their overalls on. They'll swing around on the bench, and now they're on the outside. They put clean boots that stay in this particular premises, wash their hands, and then they come toward the photographer and so really important. They have dedicated clothing and footwear to prevent that lateral spread. Many facilities have added concrete aprons at their entry, so there's a place to wash boots and change overalls and make sure that you're using your dedicated clothing and footwear. Many facilities since 2015 have set up a perimeter area around their facility, and rendering trucks don't come onto the premise. They pick up any items rendering outside. Many facilities are using wild bird repellents and screening to prevent wild birds from getting in the barns. However, there are some areas for continued improvement with these vulnerabilities. A significant area for focus is temporary help. People that might come onto the farm for just a weekend, just a couple days, they've been exposed to other farms and really need to work on limiting that. Shared equipment between premises and lack of adequate cleaning and disinfection. Not everybody does that with their rendering trucks, and so those rendering trucks entering within the facility is a concern. and then inconsistent use of that line of separation that we just talked about. And then the other thing that we're really seeing here in the current outbreak are these multi-use premises. So they might have, this is a feed mill, right? But on the same premises, they might have a feed mill, a hatchery, slaughter, and a breeder grower. And should that premise be infected, the whole thing is under quarantine, and you're going to have no movement from that premises. And it really impacts business, right? If you've got, say, a slaughterhouse on the same facility that you've got your hatchery. So that's something that we're really encouraging folks is to separate those parts of the business. We've also recognized that premises with multiple species, including especially ducks, is a concern from a biosecurity point of view. Ducks are really mega spreaders for a number of reasons. Avian influenza, and we really want to limit their contact with other birds. And then site security. People don't lock the doors, allow people to come in and off site when maybe they shouldn't be. So I was also hearing a lot of echo, so I hope I did that justice. I'm happy to take questions about our current outbreak, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wilson to continue.
Any questions for Dr. Noggle before I start? I know it was hard to hear at times, so I might be able to even answer some of the questions anybody has about her presentation.
Mr. Chairman, is there any way we could get the PowerPoint maybe emailed to us?
Yeah, we'll have that available for all the members already.
Okay.
And we have a really good website that updates those numbers every day. So I'll drop that website link in the chat here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia.
Any other questions?
Any questions for Dr. Wilson?
Dr. Knuckle? So what I wanted to talk about is some of what we're doing in the state of West Virginia. So when it comes to HPAI, it's something that we know a lot about. I think the staff at the West Virginia Department of Agriculture have spent a lot of time this year on farm looking at backyard flocks when they've gotten calls. But for the most part, the poultry industry in the state is well organized. The integrators have plans. And so although HPAI is a big deal and it's an important thing, part of the reason that nationwide, almost all, 85% of the introductions have been from wild birds, there's been very limited lateral transmission, is because the industry is well organized and has good biosecurity. In West Virginia, our next biggest animal agriculture area is cattle and calves, and that is the other end of the scale. It's not particularly well organized. There's a lot of very small producers, and it's something we worry a lot about. And so several years ago, I started spending a lot of time working with the staff of the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, particularly the Deputy Commissioner. We've worked on a lot of things. We've written some grants together. We've even written a grant not only to do agricultural research, but we've written a grant recently that we'll be resubmitting here in the weeks to come to establish a veterinary technology program at WVU, West Virginia State University, in partnership with the Department of Ag. But because of those relationships, in May of 2021, we had an exercise here on campus in what we would call a tabletop exercise. So we got a large segment of the university staff together, veterinarians, husbandry staff, administrators, communicators, disaster planners, as well as the same kinds of people from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. And we dealt with that day, on paper, a foreign animal disease ingress to the state. What would we do? How would we deal with that? What would happen? It was a busy day. We didn't have a lot of good answers for a lot of things. The most important thing that came from that day, though, was the disaster planner at West Virginia University got to meet the disaster planner from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. The communicator from the Davis College got to meet the communicator from the Department of Agriculture. The veterinarians on each side got to meet each other. And so there's a greater comfort today than there was then. The department then participated in a USDA-sponsored foreign animal disease functional exercise. So the tabletop exercise happened all in that room that day, and we could speed up time. The functional exercise that they did in November, they had to account for real time. What would it like to really play this out? And we were invited to participate in that because of that interaction we had back in May. And so the Davis College communicator got incident command training so that she could be a part of that exercise. And so she acted as one of the public information officers for the state. It's not a role of the Davis College, but as many of you would probably recognize, if something went bad in the state, although there are those like the department, like the governor's office, that would have certain legislative roles, the university is going to be asked to come to the table at least. And so we've tried to play our part. We've tried to be engaged and part of that. And as a result, we have a better relationship with those people today, and that interaction can happen. Okay. As a result of that interaction and the functional exercise in February, when the first cases were detected in the U.S. of HPAI, I and the Davis College communicator were invited to come to the every Friday afternoon interagency calls about what the status of the outbreak was, where it was moving, trying to add minds to the conversation about what we would do. Luckily, to this point, we haven't had to deal with it in the state of West Virginia, but those conversations, that planning, that training is absolutely critical to being ready for an outbreak if it were to happen. And if an outbreak happened related to our cattle and calf industry in the state, it would not go as smoothly. There's all kinds of issues in that industry about the interconnectedness of producers. As you can imagine, there are an awful lot of very small producers. If you look at a county like Preston County, which has the most farms in the state, in the county, there's a lot of small farms in Preston County. There's a lot of people with a truck and a trailer that if there was a stop movement order issued by the state, it would take a long time for some people to find out about that. And so we've had a lot of conversation about not only how the regulators and how those in the know understand what to do, but how do we effectively communicate that to the producers in the state, make them aware. There is some question about who would enforce a stop movement order, but I think the highest hurdle is how would we inform the people of the state that they are not to take animals out on the road. And I don't know how we would do that today. That's a difficult thing. When it comes to the relationships that we've tried to build with the department, with the USDA veterinarians that cover this region, those people turn over. I will turn over maybe soon. There are others that are going to turn over in time. And the only way to really maintain those relationships is to regularly have those sort of training exercises. And so as I think of things that the legislature could do, and I'm not here to tell you what to do, that's your role, but if I was to think about things that would keep me up at night, if we had a foreign animal disease come into the state and it impacted the cattle industry, the things that we need are things that facilitate more training, regular training, because the training is important, but the training provides the germination of that relationship amongst agencies and people in agencies so that we know who's out there. The ability to participate in that functional exercise in November required that our communicator in the college had ICS training. So support for people across the state to be prepared, to be well trained, to engage, because if there is a bad scenario, it's not about so much what to do. We would have an idea theoretically on paper what to do. It's about implementation in the state. We've had no outbreaks in West Virginia, but anybody that works for USDA APHIS Veterinary Services that is in West Virginia has spent at least one tour of duty, if not several tours of duty, in Iowa, Minnesota, Dakotas, California, during the HPAI outbreak, because there's a need for well-trained bodies. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to be better prepared, and we can't just do that once. We've got to get prepared and stay prepared and continue to practice being prepared.
Thank you.
We do have a capacity to test in this state. When I made my first trip down to the agricultural labs, I was very impressed with the quality of work that came out of the facilities that are there. Those people do a phenomenal job not only of supporting the state of West Virginia, but they lead the country in some of the areas of testing that they do. And the ability to have some of that testing occur in the hotbed, in Moorfield, in the middle of the 5 primary poultry counties, at least as a satellite lab, is important. Most of those poultry integrators, when it comes to HPAI, they will act on the first non-negative. And non-negative means you've gotten a test that's probably positive, but they don't call it a positive yet until it's been determined at the federal level. But the integrators will act on a non-negative to depopulate flocks, to eliminate that lateral transmission. And that's part of the reason that 85% of the cases that have been detected in the country today are from wild bird introductions, because the integrators were very active. But if we had a foreign animal disease that wasn't in the poultry industry or the swine industry, because it's kind of similarly vertically integrated, it's about awareness and being able to marshal the resources at the time that they're needed, and that's about people being trained and people knowing who to call. Questions?
Yeah, we had a question from Chairman Seibold.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wilson, just a couple of questions. Maybe I'll ask more out of ignorance than anything else. You had made a statement earlier that the poultry community is more well organized, maybe than some of the other communities. So how does that work as far as non-commercial producers, backyard flocks and things like this? So, you know, I'm in a subdivision where I have 4 neighbors who have chickens, and we are well supplied with eggs. I will mention.
Which is good, because if you're getting them from the grocery store right now, you're paying a pretty penny.
Well, I noticed that there were no eggs on the shelf for about 2.5 weeks. Yeah. And I assume that had something to do with the avian flu and the culling of flocks.
It did. There were large layer flocks in Iowa, out in the Midwest, that region, as well as eastern Pennsylvania. So backyard flocks are a different story. So the majority of birds, just because of the number of birds that are in a vertically integrated operation, are covered. But you're right. Backyard producers, regardless of the species, it is true for the swine industry too, which we think of as being vertically integrated, are often just as disconnected. And it's a communication problem. And when we had our discussions about that during the tabletop exercise, the question was, how would we alert people? And you think about things like the local feed store or ag store, where those backyard flocks might be going to get their layer mash or other things. You know, it's a difficult thing, because there are segments that are small producers, even what count as commercial producers that are not part of a integrated operation exist, particularly on the organic side. There's more of that there. They're at least smaller in size. And so it's a difficult issue. How do you alert them? I think that's why the department has spent so much time looking at taking calls from backyard flocks, because we've tried very hard to get the word out. Even in the college, I've put up posters around the building. You know, if you see a sick bird, call this number. There was a little problem early on, and we knew there was a problem because we found out that we got calls about the calls not working. So people were trying to. So it's still a difficult thing. On average, they're better organized.
You may be able to use just a suggestion, you may be able to use the emergency broadcast system just to have general knowledge in the community, because everyone gets their news from either the radio or the television, you know, and just to make that aware so they know they need to call someone and find out what the scoop is.
And I think that's a good idea, and I think multiple modes of communication, you know, those.
Yeah.
an ability to just say, we've got a stop order won't work. You've got to have communication that goes out multiple ways,
Yeah.
twitting
Yeah,
and
this is a solution.
Facebooking and all kinds of things. But
Yeah, and I would just add that we work really hard once we have detected a case in a state with both the local ag department as well as extension to get out the word so that those yard producers in that area are educated and aware. I have a story I could tell you, but I'm not going so bad. I'm not going to.
Well, the other thing that you'd mentioned was about the bovine community and then not being as well organized, and I might not have all my facts straight, but it seemed like a few years ago, and maybe it was as many as 5 or 10 years ago, there was a mandatory requirement for premise ID. So every beef that gets moved from here to there has a premise ID. We know where it came from, and when it gets transferred, we know where it's going. So they have it kind of locked down.
Somewhat locked down. It's about how do you get a hold of that person to get that. So we're in a better place, but I think it's an issue that we need to be cognizant of.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Beach. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Well, I want to follow up on Senator Seipel's question in regards to cattle operations and how are other states operating with notification and just alerting the cattle farmers, producers, livestock, stockyards, whatever it may be.
I think through those, I think they're in the same quandary we're in. Like if you could probably easily get to 75 or 80%, right? Maybe even 90%. The question is, how do you get to the last 10?
So does, let's say, North Carolina or Iowa, whatever it may be, do any of those other states have an alert system that they're working on, or is it?
Not that I'm
telling neighbor, or,
yeah.
I think that's the second way to go, I know.
Go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah, so nationally, we've made a real focus across all industries to be able to improve preparedness and response activity. And as Matt described, many of the states have participated in either tabletop activities, either state or national level, to identify how they would reach their producers, whether it be beef, whether it be swine, whether it be poultry. So I think, gosh, the echoing is so bad. There are lots of really good examples of how other states have approached this problem. And Dr. James Maxwell is on the National Association of State Animal Health Officials, and he's your state veterinarian, and probably give you some really good examples, or reach out to his colleagues about some of the things they've done in other states.
Well, let me ask something else along those lines. It seems that, and we have the Department of Agriculture here with us, that we've had protocols in place for 10, 15, 20 years, going back to gas and whatever, for the poultry producers here in the state. I'm just having a hard time understanding why we can't do something like that for the cattle industry, why we haven't advanced that far to have protocols in place that this is the way it has to play out.
I guess I should be cautious to say, it's not that we don't have protocols. It's how do we get to everybody? It's not, we could probably get to the bulk of them through Farm Bureau, through the County Farm Bureau, through the County Extension Office, local feed store. That word would get out quickly, but I don't think it would get out as efficiently as when you have to call 4 or 5 integrators that own most of the birds in those 5 counties in the Eastern Panhandle. So it's not that we have no ability. It's probably don't have as good of ability as we would like.
Because if I'm hearing you right, you want to stop movement of this livestock in their place. You just don't want anything moving around until the problem is resolved, obviously. And again, I know I could call these guys and they would tell me right now how to handle an avian outbreak of some kind, but my brother and families are still in the cattle business, and I could probably go to them and ask them, hey, what's the protocols? And they get this look on their face, like, what the hell are you talking about? But,
Yeah. It is, it's a more, because it's a more distributed group, it is harder to get uniform information to all of them. They don't, you know, even Extension would tell you they don't all come to the winter dinner meetings.
Well, I'm not trying to rattle your chain, I'm just trying to.
No, I think we're better. I think even if you look at the poultry industry, back in 2015, we didn't do as well. And by that point, we were well aware of HPAI, we were ready for it at that time, but we learned lessons. So I think it's about, you know, how do we continue to improve over what we've done in the past? So I don't want to give the impression that we've done nothing, but I think there's opportunity to continue to improve. And I think the real key is that anything that could be done to facilitate ongoing training because of the relationship piece, that's the only, as people who serve the state and have a constituency, you all, I'm sure, recognize that as there's turnover in individuals, even in offices, the rebuilding of relationships is incredibly important.
Well, Doctor, I do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, we greatly appreciate it, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Noggle. It's been very informative, and we'll have the slide presentation for anybody that wants to get it. We'll get that forwarded to you. Okay? We have any other business for the committee? If not, let's go co-chair for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we adjourn.
Thank you. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.